Sometimes when you buy a vehicle, you forget to check for the most obvious things. And in the case of this pretty little Fiat 238 van that's been converted into a camper, there's no rear view mirror. In a panel van, you don't get a rear view mirror. There's no need for a rear view mirror because you can't see behind anyway. But in this particular case, we do have two small windows back there, and there is this frame that people have put in. Quite aside from the fact that there's no rear view mirror, the visibility on this vehicle is shocking, which makes it really difficult to park and maneuver into small places. Rather than just buying a standard rear view mirror, which wouldn't do us much good in a panel van anyway, because the visibility in here is going to be pretty rubbish through that small gap and those small windows anyway, we are going to fit a state-of-the-art rear view mirror with a built-in front and rear camera. This particular unit here is the Auto Vox Pro V5, and it has a camera built in here, and it'll have a rear view camera attached to somewhere near the bumper. And the advantage of this is it's also, you can actually see through the mirror even when it's not turned on. But this will have a touch screen, a split screen, so we'll be able to see behind us and in front of us. It also has many other functions, such as automatically turning on if somebody hits your van or drives into, etc, etc. I don't think I'm going to get into all of that, but I am going to show you how to fit one of these should you ever wish to do so. Now, rear view mirrors all attached to windscreens in different manners, and this particular unit comes with 4 adapters for things like VW, Audi, Volkswagen, Toyotas, American cars. None of that helped us at all because there was actually nothing on this windscreen at all, but they do also supply this little metal fitting here, which I have super glued on to the windscreen. Now, you're supposed to use a UV glue because obviously the sun shining on super glue could eventually degenerate the glue, but that fits on there nicely. Once you've found the right bracket, you can attach this to the bracket by tightening down that screw so somebody can't simply lift the mirror off and steal it. The nice things about this version of the mirror with all the cameras in is that all the cables basically go down this one wire. At the end of that wire, you have a bundle of cables here. Now, the red wire is going to go to a permanent 12-volt feed. And for example, your cigarette lighter will be a permanent 12-volt feed, and that means there's 12 volts there whether the engine or ignition is on or not. The yellow wire is going to be attached to something that only comes on when the ignition is on, also known as the ACC circuit. Black wire is obviously the earth, and you'll normally find an earth point somewhere near the fuse box, but anything metal on the car will do. Last 2 plugs, one is to plug the rear view camera into, and this one here is for the GPS unit. So just to summarize, this mirror up here, or camera, will only turn on when both the yellow and the red have 12 volts going to them, and obviously you've got the earth connected. Now, if your car happened to have these little micro blade fuses or mini blade fuses, there'd be no problem at all. You would just unplug something that has a permanent 12 volt feed, plug that in, take the fuse out that you've just unplugged, plug it in there, connect these 2 things together, and that would be job done. Unfortunately, this van here has the old style fuses like that, so that's not going to help us. These are the old stereo wires. I assume that stereo used to live in there. So we're going to get rid of those, and we're going to run this channel under the windscreen rubber here. Now, this here, would you believe, is actually the air conditioning on this van. So when you open it up, you get air coming through the top of the van, just a hole in the top of the van. But we're going to use that to actually hide these wires like so. This job's basically going to consist of 2 parts. The first part is hiding the wire, which we've done under the trim here. And the second part is we're going to tap into some of the wires using these Wago clips. Before we start this job, we're going to disconnect the positive terminal of the battery. We don't want to be electrocuting ourselves because we'll be dealing with permanent 12 volt feed wires. What we'll do is snip this wire here off and just strip the end of it. Now, rather than cutting any wires on the van, I'm actually going to undo some of these taped connections here to find a permanent 12 volts. That would just save me cutting the wires, and then rather than twisting wires together like this, we can use those Wago clips. make a much neater finish. There's a nice example of some nice dodgy wiring there. That's just been twisted together, it's not soldered. So whenever we touch a vehicle, I'm just trying to make it better than it was. I'm not trying to make it perfect, but we're going to need a 4-way Wago clip. There's 3 wires going in there, and we're going to add 1 extra wire. The way these Wago clips work is you just pull the orange lever up, then you put the wire inside, and then you just snap the lever down, and that is job done. There we go. They actually only had a 5-way one of these Wago clips in the pack that I bought, so we've got a spare slot there should we ever need a permanent 12-volt feed for anything like the stereo, for example. So we're just going to put the earth wire on the bolt there that's holding the fuse box on, and the last thing we need to do is find a 12-volt feed that comes on when we turn the ignition on. That is the wiring done for the power. We've got 1 Wago clip here and another one back here. The yellow is the wire that comes on when the ignition is on. The red is a permanent 12 volts, and the earth is attached up here. So let's reconnect the car battery and see if I'm hooked up. In front, we just need to connect the positive terminal of the battery and tighten that up again. Okay, in theory, when I turn the ignition on, this camera should spring to life. Like so. I haven't connected the rear camera yet, so at the moment there's a camera on the back of this mirror and it's just reading the number plate on the front of the car. So we're going to have to go into the settings, change things like the time, the date, etc. But before I do that, let's just try plugging in the reversing camera and see what happens. Now this is the rear view camera here, and this can attach to either a number plate, the inside of your windscreen, or underneath the vehicle, which is where we're going to put it. This has a plug on the end here, and it also has a long extension plug which will be requiring to go the length of the van. Plugged in the little GPS unit here, you'll note that the mirror can also record your speed, your direction, etc., and also the clock will be correct, then the date and time. Once you've got everything wired in correctly, when you turn the ignition on, the mirror should turn on after a second, like so. You can turn off those chimes as well. That's the rear view camera. That message there is just because we don't have a SD card in there at the moment. And if you want to change the view, you can do so just by touching the screen to either a split view. Now we've got this sticker in our windscreen at the moment, which we're going to get rid of. Or you can just go front view camera, or what we'll probably use this for most is a rear view reversing camera. You've also got something called driver's mode when you've got the GPS plugged in, and that will track how fast you're going and also your direction. The last thing we've got to do is wire this red wire here into the reversing light, so that when you put the car in reverse, the reverse camera comes on automatically. And then we've got to obviously hide these wires under the chassis. We'll just cable tie them to the existing wires. I did think that the most useful aspect of this mirror would be the reversing camera, but it transpires that the GPS, when you're in driver's mode, showing you the speed you're driving, is probably the most useful function, because obviously this speedometer here is in kilometers an hour for starters. So when you're driving through country roads in England, very often you'll see the speed dropping to 20 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour, and you've got to do a mental calculation in your head to try and work out what that is in kilometers an hour to avoid getting a ticket. But more importantly, it transpires that this speedometer is not actually accurate anyway. So when you're doing 100 kilometers an hour on here, you would think that would be 60 miles an hour, but in actual fact on the GPS it's showing that you're doing 50 miles an hour. So this is showing that you're going much faster than you actually are, and I suspect it's because somebody has put this speedo in from another vehicle, and this is not the original speedometer from this van. Now I've now put an micro SD card in this camera. Now it slots in just in a little compartment there, and you can see that this red dot shows that we are now recording. Now if you want to play back a recording, you need to stop recording first, so you just tap that once like so, and that red button goes off, and then you can hit the play button, and the segments you can set whether they're broken up into 1 minute segments, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. I've happened to have this as a 1 minute segments, and this is just playing back a previous recording, and it records sound as well, which can be quite useful. There are a whole host of other things you can do with the reversing cameras. For example, you can set grid lines. You might, if you've got a modern car, you might already see that when you put the car into reverse, you get grid lines so that avoids you bashing into somebody. And I think you've also got a reverse sensor on here, so when you get too close to somebody, the system starts beeping, which is really useful. The reversing camera has now been neatly wired in just there. One thing that doesn't work on this van is the actual reverse light. That should come on obviously when you go into reverse gear. What you're going to have to do is have a look at the reverse gear switch under this van. Now the reverse light switch is just here. Difficult to point it out, just that switch there. So what we're going to have to do is get a voltmeter, take that switch off, get a voltmeter on and see if it's actually working. Now with the engine running, you get 12 volts, or in fact 13 volts at that plug there. And when you engage reverse gear, both of these terminals will touch, and thus power will be sent down the other wire which connects to the reverse light. Just gonna screw this switch out here and have a little look at it, make sure it actually works. This is the reverse light switch here, and that switch is what they commonly call knackered. That's not moving at all. On closer inspection of this switch, if you twist this shaft around, you can see that it extends out an awful lot longer, which makes sense. So we're just going to put some WD-40 in there, see if we can get it working again. So I've now freed this up. It springs in and out nice and easily now. The way these switches work is slightly counterintuitive, because when the car is in neutral or is not in reverse, this switch is actually depressed, and when you put the car in reverse, this comes out and basically makes the connection. So when this is depressed, there's no connection between those two terminals, and when it's not depressed, there is a connection. So let's just check that and see if that works. When I'm not touching the terminals, there's infinite resistance. As soon as I touch the terminal, you can see that that changes. So that is great. That's what it's supposed to do. It's pushed in with my hand. You can see there's infinite resistance, and as I release the switch, you can see you then get resistance. It's a bit difficult to show without a camera stand, but I'm confident that when we put that back on the vehicle, the reverse light will now work. Just screwing this switch back in, and now in theory when I screw that in, it should actually be making contact, hopefully, with the gear lever bracket here. So I've got that reverse switch back in, and this is the moment of truth basically. When I start the van, should be really use some choke, the camera comes on. With the engine running, when I put the van in reverse, the light now comes on, which is great. There we go. I'm pleased at how that's all come out. That's improved our visibility massively, and now we know what speed we're going as well, because of the little GPS unit here actually gives us an accurate speed reading compared to the speedometer. The Auto Vox V5 Pro camera from Amazon cost us £202.98, including £2.99 postage. For some reason it took us ages to find a micro SD card, and eventually we got one from Boots the Chemist. Cost us £8.99 for a 32 gig card, which was substantially cheaper than other places. You need a high speed card, so don't be tempted to go for a cheap and cheerful SD card.